Hey, I'm Nathan Cole. Have you ever seen an accident that made you ask, why would anyone do that? That's Darwin Award material. And these 5 cases would be right at the top of the list. From a cleaner who used a needle on a high-pressure nozzle to a woman who used a butane torch to thaw her frozen sliding door, ending the attempt in the craziest way possible. It was May 6, 2016, in Tampa, Florida. The morning was already warm, around 80 degrees, with heavy humidity and afternoon storms in the forecast. It was perfect weather for pressure washing, so cleaning crews had started work long before most people were awake. One of them was Elena Rosa Vargas. She was 41 years old, and just 8 months earlier, she'd walked away from a stable office job she'd held for 14 years. Friends thought she was out of her mind. She emptied most of her savings, bought a commercial pressure washer, wrapped her pickup with a company logo, and bet everything on a business she'd never run before. Then, something unexpected happened. A customer posted a before and after video of Elena stripping years of black algae off a neglected driveway. The clip spread across local social media, and within days, she had more calls than she could possibly handle. For the first time in years, she wasn't worrying about whether she'd have enough work. She was worrying about how to keep up with it. Elena took enormous pride in being reliable. She answered every message, showed up early whenever she could, and hated canceling jobs. After risking her savings to build the business, she refused to give anyone a reason to think she'd made a mistake leaving her old career. That Saturday, she had 3 jobs scheduled back-to-back before the afternoon storms arrived. While checking her equipment, she found her rotary turbo nozzle clogged with grit. Replacing it would take days, forcing her to cancel appointments, refund deposits, and risk losing the new customers she'd worked so hard to earn. She'd used the machine almost every day for months without any major problems, so she brushed the clog off as minor. A client later told investigators Elena had texted that morning, saying she'd clear it in a few seconds before heading over. So, she left the pressure washer running to keep the water moving. She held the wand tip against the driveway with one hand and tried to poke a sewing needle into the nozzle with the other. Personally, even thinking about doing that makes me nervous, but the blockage wouldn't budge. She pressed the needle in a little farther and gave the nozzle a slight turn, hoping to loosen whatever was stuck inside. She didn't realize the clog was the only thing keeping thousands of pounds of water pressure trapped behind it. The blockage suddenly broke free. Before Elena could pull her hand away, the fully pressurized stream blasted sideways through the loosened opening at the front of the nozzle instead of out in a controlled spray. The nozzle was still attached to the wand, and for that split second, the machine was operating at full pressure. The concentrated jet struck her leg from only a few inches away. She never had a chance to react. It hit the inside of her upper thigh, and this is where it gets really hard to wrap my head around. When you looked at it, it just looked like a tiny puncture, maybe the size of a pencil tip. But underneath, that water had jammed grit and tissue deep into her muscle, tearing it all up and rupturing a branch of the femoral artery. I can only imagine how confusing that must have been for her. Elena dropped the wand and grabbed her leg, pretty sure it was just a regular cut. It's terrifying how deceptive that looks, and it makes me realize how dangerous those machines really are. Within a minute, her jeans were soaked. She tried to make it toward the house to grab her phone, but she'd already lost too much blood. Her legs just gave out, and she collapsed on the very driveway she'd just finished cleaning. A neighbor later told investigators they had heard the pressure washer running continuously for several minutes, far longer than usual. Thinking something was wrong, they walked over and found Elena lying motionless beside the driveway, her hands still pressed against her injured leg. They immediately called emergency services. Paramedics arrived within minutes and rushed her to the hospital. But unfortunately, despite their efforts to stop the bleeding, she died shortly after arriving. The medical examiner confirmed she died from massive internal blood loss caused by the high-pressure injection. The tiny puncture wound concealed catastrophic internal damage. Investigators ruled the death an accident after determining she had cleared the clog while the pressure washer was still fully pressurized. It's just devastating. You work so hard to build a life, and then a split-second mechanical failure ends it all. Her family ended up canceling the rest of her jobs. Now, local safety instructors use her story to teach people that you have to shut off and depressurize your gear before you even think about clearing a clog. Even a tiny, contained-looking burst can be fatal. It's a brutal lesson, but it's one that really sticks with you. Now, this next case involved another shortcut, this time with live electricity. It was July 19, 2014, in Sacramento, California. Evening temperatures still hovered around 90 degrees as lawn sprinklers soaked neighborhood backyards, leaving the ground wet. Julian Jones Varquez was 34 and had spent more than a decade in construction. Confidence was kind of his thing. He hated paying someone else to do a job he thought he could handle, even when people warned him he was cutting corners. Friends joked that asking for help was the one thing Julian simply refused to do. His divorce the year before only seemed to make that streak worse. He bought a modest fixer-upper and threw himself into rebuilding the backyard from scratch, determined to prove he was doing just fine on his own. Every new fence post, patio stone, and light fixture became part of that mission. That night's barbecue was the first time he'd invited everyone over to show off the finished yard. But while hanging the last string of lights, he realized it came up a couple of feet short. Most people would have called it a night and picked up another extension cord the next day. Julian wasn't most people. After spending a year proving he could do everything himself, there was no way he was leaving the job unfinished over a missing few feet. Julian knew twisting bare wires together and wrapping them with Scotch tape wasn't the proper way to extend a cord. He even had proper wire connectors somewhere in the garage, but with guests arriving any minute, he convinced himself a temporary fix would hold for one evening. When you're trying to finish one last task before people arrive, a few extra minutes can feel a lot longer than they actually are. He cut the ends off 2 old extension cords, twisted the copper wires together, wrapped them with Scotch tape, plugged everything in, and watched the lights come on. And at first, it was. The music was playing, the lights were glowing, and everything looked great. Then, just minutes before his guests showed up, he noticed a section of those lights was sagging right over the kids' inflatable pool. He paused for a moment. The grass below was wet from the sprinklers, and he knew the homemade splice was lying somewhere beneath it. Instead of unplugging the lights first, he decided he'd be careful and fix it while everything stayed powered. It would only take a few seconds. Still barefoot, he walked over and stepped into the shallow water to reach the sagging strand. However, when he pulled on the lights, that tension traveled straight to the taped splice hidden in the wet grass. The tape shifted, exposing the bare copper underneath. As Julian reached down to steady the cord, his hand made contact with the exposed wire. The current went straight through him, from his hand, across his chest, down his legs, and into the water. People who were there said he froze in place. His muscles locked so tightly he couldn't let go, and he remained standing for several terrifying seconds before collapsing backward against the pool. A friend rushed over but recoiled the instant he touched Julian and felt the shock. Someone else finally ran to the garage and shut off the breaker. They pulled him free and started CPR until paramedics arrived. The electrical current had already done catastrophic damage. He died at the hospital a short time later. The autopsy showed the electricity had passed through his chest and disrupted the normal electrical signals controlling his heart, sending it into ventricular fibrillation, a rhythm that prevents the heart from pumping blood. Investigators also noted the homemade splice had no waterproof connectors, no electrical box, and no insulation beyond household Scotch tape. Combined with wet grass, standing water, and an older outdoor circuit that wasn't protected by a GFCI breaker, the setup became deadly the moment the exposed wire was touched. The barbecue never happened. In the weeks that followed, Julian's family tore out the homemade wiring and replaced it with properly installed electrical lines. They eventually finished the backyard the way he had wanted, but nobody ever held the celebration he had spent a year planning. For them, the yard became a reminder that Julian's biggest mistake wasn't trying to fix something himself. It was believing the rules didn't apply to him. The next case took longer to build. Not one mistake, but years of small habits stacking up until one Friday morning, they all caught fire at once. It was September 22, 2017, in Dayton, Ohio. Overnight rain had cleared, leaving a cool morning in the low 70s. Dave Leonard's garage was packed with old tools, cardboard boxes, newspapers, and projects waiting to be repaired instead of replaced. 52-year-old Dave had spent 30 years as a maintenance technician at a nearby auto parts plant. Around the neighborhood, he was the guy everyone called when something broke, and after decades of fixing things, he had developed a quiet confidence that sometimes crossed into stubbornness. Dave hated throwing anything away. If a manufacturer said something couldn't be repaired, he took it as a personal challenge. Friends joked that he trusted his own experience more than warning labels. And honestly, most of the time, that confidence seemed earned. That mindset had filled one corner of his garage with old cordless tool batteries, laptop batteries, and vacuum packs he was certain still had some life left in them. Over the years, he'd built up this massive pile of old lithium-ion batteries in that corner, everywhere, stuff he'd pulled from old drills, laptops, and vacuums. He kept telling himself he'd eventually rebuild them into usable battery packs instead of paying for replacements. Recycling them felt like admitting defeat, and buying new ones felt like wasting perfectly good parts. So, that Friday, he finally decided it was time to sort through the pile and salvage whatever he thought could still be saved. This is the part that really gets me. Dave didn't think he was doing anything reckless. He'd watched a few online repair videos, skimmed a couple of forum posts, and convinced himself he understood lithium batteries well enough to handle them. That's the problem with a little knowledge. Sometimes it gives you just enough confidence to ignore the people who actually know what they're talking about. He dragged the box of swollen batteries onto his workbench, planning to separate the good cells from the bad ones. The bench itself was buried under cardboard, newspapers, and oily rags, but Dave had worked around clutter for years and didn't see it as a problem. He grabbed the first swollen pack, held it against the wood, and jammed a screwdriver into the casing, believing releasing the pressure would make it safe to take apart. For a split second, nothing happened, and I can almost feel the tension in the room right then. Then it hissed. That punctured cell started venting hot gas, and it caught fire instantly, spitting flames across the bench. Dave panicked naturally and dropped the burning pack right into that pile of newspapers. The fire spread to the cardboard, and then, as I'm sure you've guessed, it started heating up all the other damaged batteries in the stack. It turned into a total chain reaction. One after another, those packs went into thermal runaway, popping and spraying burning chemicals everywhere. Within seconds, thick black smoke filled the ceiling and started pouring down toward the floor. Dave grabbed his fire extinguisher from the back wall, but it was already too late. By the time he got it, he couldn't even see his own hands in the smoke, and that, to me, is just pure nightmare fuel. He started coughing, desperately stumbling toward the side door, but he tripped over some storage boxes. He went down just a few feet from the exit, and he simply couldn't get back up before the smoke overcame him. A neighbor out walking her dog heard the popping sounds, saw the smoke, and called 911 at 9:14 a.m. Firefighters were there in 6 minutes. They put it out fast, but Dave was already gone, and it's just heartbreaking to think how close he was to making it out. The coroner later said he died from inhaling the smoke and carbon monoxide. It's truly hard for me to even think about, but the burns in his airway meant he was alive and breathing while the fire was spreading. The smoke, not the flames, is what did it, which feels even more cruel to me. Investigators later found several battery packs neatly lined up on the workbench, each marked with masking tape that read, "Good and test." Dave hadn't been cleaning the garage because he had finally given up on them. He genuinely believed he was rescuing valuable parts that everyone else would have thrown away. That is the absolute worst part. You spend all that time building a future for someone you love, and then something so preventable stops it all in its tracks. It just breaks my heart. The fire department eventually used his story in community talks, just begging people, please, never puncture or crush a lithium-ion battery. Don't try to be a hero with this stuff. Just take them to a certified recycling spot. It's not worth the risk. If you take anything away from this, please, just listen to the professionals. Those batteries are essentially small bombs when they're damaged. Just get rid of them the right way. It's really not worth losing your life over a few old drills. If you've made it this far, let me ask you, which of these would have earned your Darwin Award so far? Trust me though, the next cases somehow get even harder to believe, so hit subscribe if you haven't already. It was January 8, 2015, in Chicago. A winter storm had knocked out power across several neighborhoods, leaving thousands of homes without heat as temperatures dropped well below freezing. Inside Chloe Bennett's apartment, the cold grew worse with every passing hour. Chloe was 29, and she'd just signed her first solo lease after years of living with roommates. She was working a standard customer service job, just trying to get by, and she had this little side blog where she'd show off thrifted furniture she'd fixed up herself. She was the type of person who'd rather do things her own way than ask for help, but after the move, she was pretty much tapped out on cash. It's that stubborn independence we all have, right? You want to prove you can handle it, but sometimes that mindset is exactly what puts you in a corner. When the power went, a hotel wasn't an option, and she couldn't afford an electrician either. Instead, she started searching online for quick ways to heat a room without electricity. One suggestion kept coming up: use a small outdoor fire bowl or charcoal burner near an open window. It sounded it simple, cheap, and according to people online, perfectly safe if the room had enough ventilation. She had a small metal fire bowl meant for outdoor patios. Believing the advice she'd read, she carried it onto the tile by the balcony door and cracked the door open about 3 inches. She thought that would let the dangerous gases escape while keeping the warmth inside. What she didn't realize was that carbon monoxide builds up silently, and a small opening isn't enough to make an indoor fire safe. The worst part is that almost every safeguard failed at the same time. Her carbon monoxide detector wasn't even working. She'd taken it off the wall during the move and left it in a kitchen drawer with dead batteries, planning to reinstall it later. She lit the wood, and it caught fast. She felt so relieved, sitting on the couch wrapped in a blanket, even texting a friend that she was going to make it through the night. While the wind outside kept howling, inside, that invisible odorless gas started filling the room. For the first hour, everything seemed totally normal. The fire was glowing. She was finally relaxing, but then a headache kicked in. She blamed it on the stress of the day. Then came the dizziness and this heavy, sinking exhaustion. She thought she just needed a nap. She pulled the blanket up, closed her eyes, and that was it. She didn't wake up. By the next day, she didn't show up for work. And when her supervisor finally got the building manager to check on her, they found her just like that, still under the blanket on the couch. It's just such a brutal way to go. The medical examiner said it was accidental carbon monoxide poisoning. Her body was still breathing, but because that gas binds to your red blood cells way faster than oxygen does, her heart and brain just slowly starved until they shut down. In the months that followed, Chloe's family cleared out the house and eventually sold it. Before putting it on the market, they made sure working carbon monoxide detectors were installed on every level of the home. Friends later said they hoped anyone who lived there next would never have to learn the same lesson the way Chloe did. All it took was following bad advice, using a product in a way it was never designed to be used, and leaving one small safety device in its box instead of on the wall. And almost exactly 3 years later, in the same kind of brutal cold, the last story froze on the outside of a door and reached for heat too, just from the other direction. It was February 14th, 2018, in Minneapolis. Temperatures had stayed below zero for 3 straight days. Ice had frozen many sliding balcony doors shut, turning an everyday inconvenience into a problem that, for one woman in a hurry, would have devastating consequences. Sarah Collins was 32 and worked as a supply chain analyst. She was the kind of person who planned everything, right down to color-coded calendars and backup schedules. Friends teased her that she treated even small errands like they were business projects, but that's just how she was. That Saturday morning, she had volunteered to coach a youth soccer clinic for the first time. She wanted to make a good impression, and with only an hour before she needed to leave, she remembered her boots and cleats were still packed away in a storage box on her apartment balcony. The problem was that the sliding glass door was completely frozen shut. It wouldn't budge. She spent 30 minutes trying to scrape it with a butter knife, just getting more and more stressed because she couldn't afford to waste any time. It's one of those moments where you're so focused on the goal that you just lose sight of the bigger picture. She finally remembered she had a small butane torch in her kitchen, the kind for creme brulee. In her panicked state, she probably thought it was a smart, quick way to melt the ice on the track. She got down on her knees and started running that flame along the aluminum frame. It actually seemed to be working, and she could see the ice melting. But here's the thing. The glass was freezing cold on the outside because of the sub-zero weather, and she was heating it up fast on the inside. That huge temperature difference, it was a total recipe for disaster. Without any warning, the glass just shattered. It didn't just crack, it exploded both ways. It burst into thousands of small, tempered glass pieces that blasted outward with surprising force. Sarah was kneeling only inches away when it happened. The edge of the collapsing panel struck her, while dozens of fast-moving glass fragments hit her face and neck. One of those fragments opened a deep wound along the side of her neck. She was bleeding heavily, but she managed to get up and stagger toward the kitchen counter where her phone was charging. With blood covering her hands, she managed to unlock it and tap the emergency call button before collapsing beside the cabinets. The call connected, but she was too weak to speak. The dispatcher kept asking if anyone was there, but all they could hear was faint movement before the line went quiet. Even without an answer, they sent help right away. When firefighters forced the door open a few minutes later, they found Sarah on the kitchen floor just a few feet from her phone. They rushed to treat her, but she had already lost too much blood. The autopsy ruled her death a tragic accident. Investigators determined the glass had been heated too quickly, causing it to shatter from thermal shock. Although tempered glass is designed to break into small pieces instead of large shards, the force of the panel bursting apart sent fragments flying across the kitchen. Several caused deep cuts, including one that severed her carotid artery. The soccer clinic went ahead that morning, but Sarah never arrived. As friends and volunteers tried calling her, parents assumed she had been delayed by the weather. It wasn't until later that afternoon that they learned what had happened. Investigators later reminded the public never to use an open flame to thaw frozen glass or door frames, as rapid heating can cause tempered glass to fail without warning. In the years that followed, the Youth League dedicated its first clinic of each season to Sarah's memory, a reminder that a few minutes saved are never worth risking a dangerous shortcut. And that's the part that stays with you the most. She was so close to walking out that door, and she never got the chance.